'Cause baby, you were born this way.
Hello, I'm Francesca Racino.
And I'm Ariane Zetzer.
And we would like to introduce our project, Illegal Intimacy, the Lawrence v. Texas Revolution and the Reform of Morality Laws.
Because lawmakers viewed certain private behaviors as immoral, they created laws that defined sodomy very broadly. But, Ariane, do you know what sodomy is?
No, I don't. Tell me, what is sodomy?
Well, sodomy is any form of sexual intimacy where reproduction cannot occur, which includes masturbation or penetration of the mouth or anus. Lawrence v. Texas was a court case between two men, Tyrone Garner and John Lawrence. These two men were caught having sexual contact in the comfort of their own home when a police officer forced his way into Lawrence's home and arrested them.
However, as invasive as this was, because this happened, the Lawrence v. Texas decision sparked a legal revolution by overturning sodomy laws and redefining the constitutional right to privacy. This revolution provoked social and political reactions rooted in moral opposition. It ultimately inspired reform through the expansion of LGBTQ+ rights and the legalization of same-sex marriage.
Intimacy laws have existed in the United States since its founding. These laws were used to regulate relationships and punish those who defied traditional norms.
Sodomy laws were first introduced in 1636 by the Plymouth Colony. The Plymouth Colony had created a list of capital offenses liable to death. This included treason, witchcraft, arson, rape, murder, bestiality, adultery, and sodomy.
Sodomy laws did not say anything about the behavior of same-sex relationships. These changes did not come until the 1860s when legislation added the first sodomy law to the Penal Code. Sodomy laws were created to prevent acts that they saw as going against nature, because they believed the idea of reproduction was viewed as the pairing of a male and a female. So, during the 20th century, homosexuality, known as sexual deviation, was considered an illness and was recognized as a mental disorder in 1952 by the American Psychiatric Association. Before Lawrence v. Texas, there were numerous legal battles to end sodomy laws. One of these cases was Bowers v. Hardwick, which was fought because the sex was consensual and the arrest was a violation of fundamental rights. The court case was lost as the final judgment stated that sodomy is immoral, which led to the belief that sodomy laws could not be invalidated. Later in Lawrence v. Texas, the Stanley v. Georgia case built on the 5th and 14th Amendment was the most important, as it stated that one could not be arrested in the privacy of one's home.
Going back to Bowers v. Hardwick,
Bowers v. Hardwick was overturned on June 26, 2003, which meant that sodomy laws were invalidated, and this allowed for same-sex relationships to happen. In turn, this also overturned other court cases involving same-sex relations. This came back to Lawrence v. Texas. Lawrence and Garner were originally arrested for having sexual intercourse in the privacy of their own home, after the police broke in due to a false disturbance call. It was then decided by the court that this was an invasion of privacy, and it was argued using the Equal Protection Clause, 14th Amendment, and the Due Process Clause of the 5th Amendment. This ended criminalization of LGBTQ+ relationships. Lawrence v. Texas redefined constitutional privacy and liberty, final ruling that privacy rights, no matter the gender, could not be violated under the rights of the 14th Amendment. The final judgment stated that the ruling of Bowers was flawed as it was based on morals, and through that overturning of Bowers, all pretext for laws targeting LGBTQ+ individuals disappeared. While there were many positive reactions, there were also many negative reactions to the revolutionary decision surrounding Lawrence v. Texas and the constitutional right of privacy.
Some of the many positive reactions came from the LGBT activists and civil rights groups, as they celebrated the ruling that gave them rights and recognition. They saw a change in how they were viewed by society in more positive light and with dignity.
In the following clip from the oral argument of Lawrence v. Texas, Justice Kennedy talks about the idea that specific sex shouldn't be labeled as immoral based on the people committing the act, and that people should have control over their own anatomy.
The historical premises are not without doubt. At the very least, they are overstated. Now, it must be acknowledged that the court in Bowers was making the broader point that for centuries there have been powerful voices to condemn homosexual conduct as immoral. The condemnation has been shaped by religious beliefs, conceptions of right and acceptable behavior, and respect for the traditional family. For many persons, these are not trivial concerns, but profound and deep convictions accepted as ethical and moral principles to which they aspire and which thus determine the course of their lives. These considerations do not answer the question before us, however. The issue is whether the majority may use the power of the state to enforce those views on the whole society.
The negative reactions mainly came from religious and conservative groups. These two main groups were opposing the decision that privacy rights were given to people in same-sex relationships. They claimed that it undermined traditional moral values, which were very important to the church. When I went to Catholic school, there was a girl everyone was friends with, and she was popular with every grade level. But when they began to use he/they pronouns, the students in the school began to gossip. In Catholic school, we were taught that traditional opposite-sex relationships and marriages were normal, that you were a girl or a boy and that was it, you couldn't change your identity, and that you were just confused. We were taught to follow the traditional roles of society and to marry someone of the opposite sex.
Why would they make you guys think that at such a young age?
Well, they wanted us to think of it as normal, and when you're taught something as a child, it becomes solidified into your beliefs unless you choose to learn by yourself later on in life. And now that we know the reaction from the people, Ariane, what was the reaction among the political spectrum?
As a political response, there were increased debates over traditional values surrounding sexuality and family. Due to the popular belief that homosexuality and sodomy are immoral, many states held on to their anti-LGBT policies. For example, a political survey showed that in 2025, 14 states still had their sodomy laws, while some states even went as far as to ban the sale and distribution of sexual devices. These examples show how far our society is willing to go to preserve its beliefs. Francesca, what are some of the debates facing the public?
So, some of the debates facing the public were that many people had questions about morality and the power it had over constitutional rights. Others were worried about the change that would follow and the rise of LGBTQ recognition in society.
The following clip that is about to play is from Justice Scalia, who agrees with the opinion that sodomy is immoral and that Lawrence and Tyrone are in the wrong, and that he disagrees with the majority opinion.
I would like to summarize here just a few general considerations. The Texas statute at issue here undeniably seeks to further the belief of its citizens that certain forms of sexual behavior are, as the court says, quote, immoral and unacceptable. That is the same interest furthered by criminal laws against fornication, bigamy, adultery, adult incest, bestiality, and obscenity.
So, what were some lasting changes that came from the decision?
So, some lasting changes were the legal reforms. For example, there was a decriminalization of same-sex intimacy nationwide, which also helped the privacy rights because people of the same sex could then engage in sexual intercourse without worrying about any disturbance, such as the disturbance that Lawrence and Garner had experienced. There were also the social reforms. People began to look into the LGBTQ community more, and by people learning more about these people in this community, it led to a wider acceptance among society of LGBTQ individuals. As more people began to realize that even if people were gay, they were in love, just as most opposite-sex relationships. People learned to no longer fear love, even if it looked different from what was traditional. Even some people within church communities began to accept the LGBTQ community, saying that they didn't care what the traditional beliefs were and that people should be allowed to love whoever they want, even claiming that Jesus would have accepted them and wanted them to be happy. And this is what really turned heads and allowed for further acceptance. So now that we know the lasting changes, what were some of the major outcomes?
Some of the major outcomes of the Lawrence v. Texas case were the passing of Bergefell v. Hodges, which recognized same-sex marriage, the further integration of homosexuals into society, and the repeal of discrimination in the workforce against homosexuals, later including transgender individuals. But there was still ongoing resistance against LGBT rights by traditional groups. In the last couple of years since Trump's presidency, they have been talking about overturning same-sex marriage laws. This happened in 2025, but the Supreme Court has denied to hear the request, showing how far the acceptance of the LGBT community has come. Another example was the recognition of transgender individuals, with the reasoning that in nature there are only two sexes. Cases like this show that reform is not permanent and must be defended.
Lawrence v. Texas was a revolution of ideas that overturned unjust laws based on morals and redefined privacy for everyone. While the reaction to the case sparked initial debate and opposition nationwide, it led to long-term reform both legally and socially, with the now open acceptance of LGBTQ individuals today. The Lawrence v. Texas case proves that constitutional change can reshape society and expand equality. We hope you learned more about the court case of Lawrence v. Texas and the importance of privacy in all relationships, even same-sex relationships. Thank you for listening to our podcast.